Hey folks, so once again I am responding to Matt Slick's 31 Questions for Atheists from the carm.org website. It is linked in the description box of this video. In the previous video in this little mini-series of mine, I answered questions 1 through 10 on this list. I'm now going to answer questions 11 through 20. So let's get started with question 11 from Matt Slick's Questions for Atheists, which is, if you were at one time a believer in the Christian God, what caused you to deny his existence? The realization that there was no good reason to believe in him in the first place. That's why I'm an atheist. I would say that not just about the God of Christianity, but about the God of every religion I've ever heard of. I just don't see any real good reason to believe that those gods exist, any of them. That's why I'm an atheist. If you ask why am I not a Christian, I mean, because I've said before in videos that even if I thought the God of the Bible existed, I still would not be a Christian. And that's because there are aspects of that God as described in the Bible that I find morally reprehensible, and I would be incapable of worshiping such a God. I would not wish to be a follower of such a God. I would be incapable of it. So even if I thought that God existed, if God is as depicted in the Bible, I could never worship him. I could never be a Christian. But yeah, the reason I don't think that the Christian God exists is it's the same reason I'm an atheist. There's no reason to think that he does. Number 12, do you believe the world would be better off without religion? That's a really difficult question to answer. It's extremely tempting to say yes, and quite a few of my fellow atheists would answer the question that way. They would say emphatically, yes, of course the world would be better off without religion. And it's understandable why they would say that. And I have felt that way myself in the past. It's easy to look around the world and see all of the harm that is caused by religion, all of the ignorance that is propagated by it, all of the superstition that people still cling to because of it, all of the war, all of the hatred and terrorism and acts of violence and division that are religiously motivated. And it's easy to look at all that and say, well, of course we'd be better off without religion. Look at all of the horrible things that are happening because of it. But let's not forget that as atheists, we believe that religion is a human construct. Religion isn't something that invaded our world. Religion is something that we made up. And that's grossly oversimplifying it, but at bottom, that's basically what happened. People made this stuff up, and people believed it and accepted it and propagated it and acted in accordance with it and manipulated it and took advantage of it and used it as a weapon against others. But it's a human-made thing. And if religion did not exist, there's no reason to believe that all of the harm that it's associated with would just vanish. Because if we didn't have religion to fight about, if we didn't have religion to divide us against each other, sadly, I think we would probably find other reasons. Now, I would say that I think we would be better off if more people believed more true things. That's not necessarily a question or an answer that is limited to the scope of religion. I think we would be better off as people if more people believed more things with good reasons to believe them, instead of relying on superstition or tradition or bias or prejudice. I think if we tried to believe more true things with good reason, then the world would be much better off. Number 13, do you believe the world would be better off without Christianity? It's a similar answer to my answer to the previous question. I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, look at all the bad things that Christians do in the name of their faith, so if we just got rid of Christianity, hey, all those bad things wouldn't happen and we would automatically have a net improvement in the world. I don't think it's that simple. I think that's a very simplistic and naive way of looking at it. Actually, I think if Christianity as a whole, as like a worldwide institution across its many churches and denominations and whatever, could be remade in the image of the most progressive and humane community-minded Christians, I think that would make the world a much better place. I think if there were more Christians who saw their faith as something motivating them to be good people, to be selfless people, to be servants of their communities, to feed the hungry, to build shelter for the homeless, to provide education, and I mean real education, not just indoctrination into Christian tradition, but I mean real education, social justice, I think that the world would be a much better place. So you don't have to remove Christianity completely. You can replace Christianity with a more humane form of Christianity. And that would actually make the world a much better place. And again, as I said in the previous video, I would still disagree with them about the existence of God and the divinity of Jesus and a bunch of other things. But if they were actively trying to make the world a better place and promoting health and plenty and friendship and peace and liberty and freedom, we would have way less to fight about. Number 14, do you believe that faith in a god or gods is a mental disorder? Two very important points to make in response to this question. First, no, I don't think it's a mental disorder. I think it is a belief that is incorrect. And I don't think believing in something incorrect makes you mentally ill. And I think it's incredibly condescending both to the non-mentally ill religious folks and to the genuinely mentally ill to say, well, if someone believes in God or if someone is religious, that's a mental disorder. People who are actually mentally ill deserve way more understanding and way more help than we currently give them. And it is absolutely terrible to try and exploit the very real problem of mental illness in order to score points against religious people in an argument. It's a really terrible line of thinking, and it should be completely done away with. And any atheist should be embarrassed to say something as wrong and as insensitive and as just plain stupid and counterproductive as religion is a mental disorder or religion is a mental illness. It's just asinine. It should not be said. The second point is that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. So I personally am not qualified to diagnose people with mental disorders. When I say I don't believe that religion is a mental disorder, I am basing my opinion on the expertise of the overwhelming consensus of the medical field and the psychiatric and psychological fields. And they don't think that belief in God or having a religious conviction is a mental disorder. So that's what I think. And unless you are a psychiatrist or a psychologist and are qualified to diagnose people with a mental disorder, you don't have any right and you don't have any standing to look at a religious person and say, mental disorder. Number 15, must God be known through the scientific method? The answer to that question, I think, has to be yes, because outside of the scientific method, I don't know how you know anything other than maybe your own private thoughts. You know, I mean, but even if you say, well, God reveals himself to you, you know, how do you determine whether what you are experiencing is a genuine revelation from God or just a delusion that you are experiencing, or maybe a revelation from Satan or some other, you know, malevolent force that is impersonating God? Like, how do you tell if it's a legitimate, genuine revelation? Don't you have to employ some method like the scientific method? Don't you have to test it somehow? Don't you have to verify it? Don't you have to find some kind of evidence? You know, even most religious folks who say that, they say, well, how do we know that God is really speaking to us? The answer I hear most often from preachers is, well, check it against the scriptures. Well, that's like an experiment. You're looking for evidence. And I don't see how we know anything unless we use the scientific method. We might not always think of it as the scientific method, and it's not always, you know, laboratory experiments and controlled tests, but it's testing things against the evidence. If you don't do that, how do you know anything? Yes, of course, God must be known through the scientific method. Number 16, if you answered yes to the previous question, then how do you avoid a category mistake by requiring material evidence for an immaterial God? Because the immaterial God interacts with our material world and would leave evidence behind, you would think. Aaron Ra put it most succinctly when he said, when God reaches his arm into the universe, he pulls it out dripping with physics. And there are even simpler answers to the question. Even if you believe that God was immaterial, if you believe that Jesus was an incarnation of God, Jesus was not immaterial. At least not completely. He had a physical body. He was said to have done certain things. Why should we not expect to see evidence of those things? Why should we believe that Jesus did miraculous things if there are no evidence that those things ever took place? Or indeed, if there is no evidence that such things even can take place? No, you don't get out of the requirement for evidence by saying, oh, God is immaterial. If you want people to believe it, then you need to have evidence that the things you're saying happened, or at the very least, can happen. And Christians of the Matt Slick variety are nowhere near that standard. Number 17, do we have any purpose as human beings? We have the purposes that we choose for ourselves. As individuals, as groups, as communities, perhaps as a species, if we can come up with a great shared common purpose. Yeah, their life is filled with purpose. It's just purpose that is generated from us, not purpose that is imposed upon us by a higher being. For the life of me, I've never understood the appeal of that kind of purpose. I've never understood the appeal that some people find in a purpose that is given to you by God. What is so great about the idea of someone just coming up to you and assigning you a purpose that you have nothing to do with before that? Just saying, okay, this is what your life means. I created you, and I created you for a particular purpose, and I didn't consult you when choosing this purpose for you, and you had no hand in the selection of it, or I just created you for this purpose, and this is what you're supposed to do. So there you go do it. Enjoy your purposeful life. I don't understand that. To me, if purpose isn't invested in you and doesn't come from you or your friends or your family or your community or things that mean something to you, then why even call it purpose? It's if it's not that, then it's just directions. You're not saying God gives you purpose. You're saying God gives you directions. And I guess directions are nice. At least when you have directions, you know where you're going. But that doesn't mean that it's someplace you want to go. 18. If we do have purpose, can you as an atheist please explain how that purpose is determined? I guess I kind of jumped ahead, didn't I? Yeah, I just explained how it's determined. It's determined by us as individuals, as groups, as families, as friends, as societies, whatever. We determine our purpose. Our purpose is no one else. If other people determine our purposes for us against our will or without our consent or without our consultation, then I don't see how you can call those purposes. Life has the purposes that we deem it to have. Number 19, where does morality come from? From the same place as religion and purpose. It comes from us. I think morality is a human construct. And a lot of apologists, I think, would take that and then try to straw man it into saying that I believe that morality isn't real or that morality doesn't exist. But that is not what I'm saying. That's not what I believe. Morality is something that humans have created as a species, as a culture, as cultures, and it is very important and it's very vital. Morality is asking and struggling to answer moral questions. Morality is trying to figure out how we should treat each other. Morality is trying to figure out how we should best act in accordance with the empathy that most of us naturally feel toward one another, and how we should deal with people who offend that empathy, who contradict it. And it's not always easy, and it's not always clean. In fact, it hardly ever is. But that's what we have. And I think it comes from us. I think it's a combination of culture and social conditioning and individual preference and individual choice and biology, probably. I think there are evolved elements. Like I said, most people seem to have a natural sense of empathy. And I think it's all mixed up together, and it's very complicated and very old and very human and also very changeable, constantly evolving, which is very good. Because if morality didn't evolve, then we would still be in the same moral state that we were in when we first came up with morality. In other words, very primitive, and probably by our standards today, very barbaric and very limited. So it's good that morality is not a static thing that is imposed upon us from on high, but rather something that comes from within us that we can change and stretch and grow to fit what we need it to fit as we continue to change and grow and evolve. Morality comes from us. Question 20, are there moral absolutes? No, I don't think there are. I think there are moral concepts on which there is very broad agreement, but I don't think that's the same as saying there are moral absolutes. I don't think morality is like that. I'll put it this way, I don't think that moral laws are like physical laws. Physical laws describe the way things behave, and they seem pretty absolute. A law of physics says that this is the way this always happens. And moral laws don't work that way. Moral laws can grow and can change and can evolve. So no, I would not say there are any moral absolutes. And we'll go ahead and cover number 21 before we end this episode of the series, because number 21 is, if there are moral absolutes, could you list a few of them? I don't think there are moral absolutes, so I can't list any. I did mention in my answer to the previous question that I think there are moral matters on which there is very broad agreement. I think there are certain moral questions to which most human societies have the same or very similar answers. Murder is generally frowned upon. Theft is generally frowned upon, things like that. Now, the definition of what constitutes murder or what constitutes theft can change sometimes radically from society to society, but there is always a taboo against murder or against theft, however it is defined. So that would constitute something like a broad moral agreement. But no, I wouldn't say that those are moral absolutes. Well, that's it for this episode of this thrilling 3-part miniseries on Matt Slick's Questions for Atheists. I will be back in the 3rd and final installment. Join me for the thrilling conclusion when I answer questions 22 through 31 and wrap this puppy up. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, share it, subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed already, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this by sponsoring this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching. Take care.